more than 3 decades, Troy Harrison has helped B2B companies build stronger sales organizations, improve performance, and navigate today's buying environment. Troy is a featured speaker for Vistage Worldwide and author of Sell It Like You Mean It and The Pocket Sales Manager. With 15 years in frontline sales and sales management before he began teaching others, he founded the Sales Navigator in 2004 and has worked with hundreds of B2B companies in 23 countries. He's known as the Sales Navigator. Please join me in welcoming Troy Harrison.
This is the 4th session in the Navigator's Chart series, and this is the one that covers the most expensive decisions that you will make, which is the crew, and that is building salespeople who actually perform and stay. Sales turnover is one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, things that a company can encounter, and it is, without doubt, the most soul-destroying thing that you can encounter. I spent many years as a sales manager, and I will tell you what, the most difficult things I ever had to do were deal with turnover because, if you release someone, it doesn't matter how much they underperform. If you release someone, you are always conscious that you are destroying at least temporarily their livelihood. And I always wanted to make sure that I'd given them every opportunity to succeed so I could look in the mirror at the end of the day after I did it. That still doesn't change the fact that those people had to go home and tell their families, hey, I lost my job. So the object of this webinar is to give you the tools and the knowledge to understand what the hiring landscape is nowadays and to implement, at least understand what some of the touch points are and some of the fail points in hiring. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're doing is, again, it's the third layer, fourth part of the series of the Navigator's Chart, but the third layer. And if you haven't seen the Navigator's Chart, let me recover that with you. The Navigator's Chart is my framework and model for building a successful sales organization. Successful sales organizations are built in 4 layers, and each layer builds upon the last one. And these 4 layers in total determine the performance of your sales organization. The first and most basic layer is the waters. The waters are, who are your buyers? Where do they live? Where do they live online? How do they process information? How do they receive information? How do they like to be contacted? This is your selling environment. It also covers whatever channels you participate in, but the waters are the thing that we can't control. Every other layer that I'm going to talk about, those are yours. You can make decisions on those. We cannot pick our waters, unless I suppose you decide to change markets completely or change directions. The second layer, which builds on the water, and by the way, I've used the analogy of the Navigator's Chart because these are the 4 layers that also determine your ability to complete a successful journey on the water. So the second thing, once you know what your waters are, and it's very important to know what your waters are. I did a webinar on this. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. It's on my YouTube channel. The second layer is the vessel. That is your sales infrastructure, your company, your offer, your KPIs, your metrics, your sales processes, your comp structure. All of those things that make up the back end of your sales operation that you expect your salespeople to operate. And it has to be built for the waters. You wouldn't take a lake boat out on the Atlantic Ocean, and I'd be willing to bet that if you took one of those huge ocean-going freighters and put it on your average lake in the United States, that probably wouldn't work out real well either. It's the same way. Your infrastructure has to be built for the waters that you're dealing with. And I'll give you an example of that. I got a call, it's been about 3 months ago now, from a guy in Georgia who has an office technology dealership. I've known this guy for about 10 years. We've never done business together. And he called me up and he said, hey, Troy, I'd like to see about having you come down and do a half-a-day training on prospecting techniques for my salespeople. I said, well, okay, I can certainly do that. But first, I'd like to know a little bit more about what it is that you're trying to accomplish and what problem you're trying to solve. I said, what do you see? And he said, well, he said, I have a metric that I've had for years that says that my salespeople need to do 20 calls per day. And historically, that's resulted in 5 appointments per week. Typically, we get one appointment for every 20 calls. And he said, all of a sudden, within the last couple of years, my salespeople aren't getting appointments anymore. I said, well, okay. I said, same salespeople? He said, well, 3 of the 5 are. 2 of the 5 seem to be pretty skilled. Well, okay. I said, okay, what are you seeing when I said, I assume you have CRM. Yep, they had CRM. I said, okay, go into your CRM and look at your salespeople and their calls that they're making and tell me what's going on. I can hear him clicking keys and he goes, well, all they're doing is leaving messages. Okay, here's what's happened. His waters have changed. He had a call metric built on the waters, a base of buyers that would answer the phone on a predictable level. And I get that. I built metrics around that too. Up until about 6, 7 years ago, you could count on buyers answering the phone about every third or fourth time you called. In other words, if you're working off of a good database, and you're picking up the phone and making prospecting calls, about every third or fourth time you dial the phone, you're going to be talking to who you want to talk to. And that wasn't happening. All those people were doing was leaving voicemails. I said, well, here's the thing. That's not a problem with your salespeople. I can't train your salespeople to make their buyers start picking up the phone again. What I could do is come down and let's do a consulting project where we figure out where your buyers are and what method is best to get to them. Then we build a new set of KPIs around that. And he said, well, that's interesting. I'll call you back in a couple of days. Called me back in a couple of days. He said, well, I had a meeting with him yesterday. I told him to work harder, they get fired. Even I don't win them all. But what has happened is he had a vessel built for a different set of waters than what he's sailing right now. And he hasn't figured that out yet. At some point, I hope he will, because it will determine the success or failure of Salesforce. But what we have seen in the last, particularly 5 years, has been a seismic shift in our waters. So you got to readjust your vessel. Well, once you've got your vessel, then you've got to have your crew. Your crew is your salespeople, hiring them, developing them, leading them, training them, all of those things that go into having a successful crew to operate your vessel. This has changed too because as your vessel changes and as your waters change, sometimes your salespeople need to change too. Not even if the people themselves need to change, don't need to change, the way they approach their business needs to change. I'll give you an example. Uh, there's a type of salesperson that I like to call the good time Charlie. Good time Charlies are very charismatic, a lot of fun, great to go out and have a beer with. They'll take you to a ball game, they'll take you to a dinner. Probably don't know a hell of a lot about how to solve their customers' problems, but boy, they're fun guys to be around. And for years and years, when sales was based on personal connections, they were pretty successful. What's happening now, particularly generationally with the millennials and Gen Zs, is that personal charisma doesn't get you nearly as far. Now those people want you to solve problems, and a lot of good time Charlies out there are really struggling. So again, waters determine the vessel, vessel determines the crew. And then finally, all of that determines the route, which is your sales process, your sales methodology, and your path to revenue. And by the way, most sales training only touches layer 4, the root. And I'll be honest with you, that's why most sales training doesn't stick because it doesn't touch any of the other three layers. And as I have said, you get to pick your vessel, your crew, and your route. You don't get to pick your waters. So everything has to be built to sail the right waters. Today's webinar, as you know, is on the crew. So let's go ahead and start diving into it. And I said something at the beginning of this that I want to reiterate right now. The most expensive decisions in your sales organization are about people. And I bet if you've been a sales manager for longer than a week, you probably have a horror story about somebody you either hired or inherited that cost you a hell of a lot of money before you finally made the right decision. Uh, there are a lot of inappropriate hires, and even the right hires can go bad if they're not onboarded and managed right. And that's what we're going to talk about is who you hire, develop, and keep. So let's go ahead and move into this. First of all, let's think about assumptions. Everything we do is based on certain foundational assumptions. That's what the waters are. Most of the everything we do in sales methodology is about trying to predict buyer behavior. Well, we make assumptions when we hire salespeople too. And here are the assumptions that most sales leaders make when they think about hiring their crew. They think, first of all, we are looking for talent. We're going to hire the right resume, the right interview answers, the right references. And look, all of those things are important. I teach a version. Last summer, I did a program which was great, and I'm going to do it again. I don't know. I may do it this fall. I may do it next spring, which was a very intense deep dive on hiring here in Kansas City. It was not cheap, but it got great results for the people who came. And yes, we do look at the resume, we do look at the interview answers, and we do look at the right references. But one of the things that I see is that the most common reason that people hire salespeople is what they call cultural fit, which is gut instinct. And look, yes, you are looking for talent, but you're looking for something beyond that. And we'll talk about that momentarily. Where most sales hires, where most good sales hires go bad is in the onboarding and training phase. Sales managers are very impatient to get salespeople out selling, and business owners are even more impatient. The phrase that I think is most harmful in sales hiring is hit the ground running. I want to hire somebody who's going to hit the ground running. Well, if you want that, that's going to affect the people you hire. It's going to affect how you shortcut an onboarding process, and it's going to affect how you lead them. And all of those things are going to be done in negative ways. And I was actually charitable on this slide. I said, we onboard for 2 weeks, hand them a comp plan, expect them to figure out the rest. I'll be honest with you. A lot of onboarding out there is summed up in this phrase. Here's your desk, here's your phone, good luck, you're on your own. And that's not successful, especially nowadays. One of the biggest changes that we see in the millennials and specifically Gen Zs, what I call the just outs, people who are just out of college, they need lots and lots of structure around them. They need a very structured onboarding program. And I've always advocated, by the way, for structured onboarding. I look at onboarding in a 90-day process. The first 30 days is knowledge. I don't want them making a sales call. I just want them learning my company, my customers, and my business environment. Second 30 days is activity. Now start ramping up, start building a sales pipeline. And the third 30 days is some sort of a result. If you have a short sales cycle, it's reasonable to expect that they're making sales within that third 30 days. But if you don't, then you need to have some sort of a milestone. Maybe it's proposal count, whatever, to determine if they're making progress within those 90 days. But it's not 2 weeks and give her hell, Tiger. It's 90 days, very structured with touch points. This is even more important for Gen Zs, and I want you to think about this. Gen Zs have been highly structured and regimented all their lives. I'm Gen X. We're the generation that went out and played. Gen Z is the generation that has play dates. And there's such a seismic shift in that. And this is the moment, by the way, where a lot of owners and managers sit there and go, them darn kids. That's not what I'm doing at all. That is our reality. Now, you can take a Gen Z, bring them in very structured, and then over time, over about that first 6 months, start peeling away the structure as they get it figured out, and they can become every bit as independent as a boomer or a Gen X salesperson. It just takes them a little while longer to do so. And I was having this conversation a couple of weeks ago with a client, and it was kind of funny because he did the same pushback that a lot of people do when I say this. He said, look, Troy, I never had that, and I got rolling fine. Why should they get it? And I said, okay, Ted, I get that. But what would it have done for your ramp up if you had? Think about that for a moment. And his jaw, you could hear his jaw hit the table. And he said, well, now that you mention it, I said, exactly. Look, I said, the fact that you and I both walked uphill to school both ways in 2 feet of snow with flip-flops on, doesn't mean that we ought to expect our new salespeople to do that. We're all about making money here. It's not about proving a point. And I think that whole, well, I didn't have to do that, why should they have to? It's more about proving a point. It's ego. Put your ego aside and figure out what works. And then third, foundational assumption, which was wrong, is retention is compensation. In other words, money retains. Now, I've maintained this for a long time. You can get almost anybody to do almost anything for enough money for a little while. But at some point, something in them will break and they go, Prime example of this on my last sales management job, which was over 20 years ago now. I was managing an inside sales force for a steel distributorship. And my top salesperson, who's still a friend of mine to this day, was named Kelly. And I had a vacancy, and she came to me and she said, Troy, my best friend, Jolene, wants to try selling. She's a grade school teacher, getting tired of not making much money, but she's a great communicator. She'd be awesome. You know, I can help teach her, yada, yada. I said, okay, so I interviewed Jolene, and I felt like Jolene had a lot of potential. So she came in, and I'll be honest with you, she started kicking ass. Uh, Her third month, she made more money there than she had made in any 3 months previous. By her sixth month, she was number two on the board behind Kelly. I mean, she was on a rocket ride. Uh, just an incredible talent and fun to work with. And the first business day after her 6 months, I mean, she just got a huge paycheck. She came in to me and sat down and said, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." She goes, "Shut the door." Okay. And she just burst into tears and she said, "I can't do this anymore. I've got to quit." And of course, like most guys, I said, "What did I do wrong?" She said, "It's not you." She said, "You're a great manager. I like everybody here. I even like my customers." She goes, "I hate selling." She goes, "It's not fun for me. It's just a drudge to come in here and do this every day." She said, "I am going to go back into teaching. I didn't make nearly as much money, but I loved it." And that's what she did. And to this day, she's a school teacher and she still enjoys it. Uh, Prime example of this woman in month six was she probably that first year would have easily doubled her best year of income prior, maybe tripled it. But yet she couldn't, she just couldn't do that. She didn't want to do that job. I can't say she couldn't because that sounds insulting. There's nothing insulting about this. But the reality of it is, I could have offered her double what she was getting paid and it wouldn't have mattered. She didn't like the job. But we assume when people leave, they left for more money. A lot of times they didn't leave for more money. A lot of times they went for uh, different opportunities, different environments, even a different leader. But each one of these things can cost you real money if you're hanging on desperately to those assertions. So, what do we look for? Well, here's what today is going to be about. We're going to talk about hiring, we're going to talk about developing, and we're going to talk about leading salespeople, which is what you came for. So, and I got to admit, I was a little pessimistic on this, but I said the salesperson you're about to hire probably won't work out. And before anybody gets mad at me, and you might, the numbers back me up. Here's why. 2/3 of B2B sales hires underperform or fail outright within the first 18 months. 2 out of every 3 hires. That means, by the way, if you are winning 50% of your hires, you're actually above industry standard. So feel good about that. That also means somebody else is doing a hell of a lot worse than 2/3 to make that average work. And this, by the way, is a composite of data compiled by HubSpot, Serious Decisions, and Bridge Group. There are a number of different studies out there, and I aggregated them to get that number. They're all within a close range of 2/3. But think about that. On the average, every time a new salesperson is hired, 2 out of 3 of them are going to fail. Does that mean 2/3 of the sales labor pool sucks? No, of course not. It means that there's some systemic issues. But let me impact that. First of all, an average sales hire, the fully loaded cost of one is 150 grand. Now that's fully loaded. That is salary, that is training cost, that is recruiting cost, it's opportunity cost, all those things. Can be a hell of a lot more than that. I actually, in a Vistage group, had one guy document a $4.2 million loss on one sales hire. And I mean, you could see his tears on the paper as he was writing it down, poor guy. And he actually emailed me later to let me know that the seminar that I did actually helped him. So I felt good about that. Most of the time, that wrong sales hire is there for a year before we figure out it isn't going to work. But here's the bad news. Very seldom does the process change before hiring the next one. The excuse is always, they weren't any good. I see it all the time. Reality of it is, if 2/3 of the fail rate, there's a lot of good salespeople and probably appropriate fit salespeople that are getting cycled through a bad system and a bad process. But the problem is that most of the time when we interview, the sales manager thinks that they're evaluating, well, can they sell? Can they fit the culture? Will they hit quota? That's what they think they're hiring. What they're actually seeing is the professional candidate situation. A lot of times, the professional candidate and the top salespeople are not the same people. What they're actually seeing is whether they interview well. And by the way, I've heard the statement that how they interview is a reflection of how they'll sell for you. That's not correct. How they'll interview is a reflection of the absolute best case scenario on their best day of how they're going to sell for you. So whenever you see how somebody interviews, mentally dial that back a little bit, 10 to 15% to think of how they're going to be on a sales call. You figure out whether they're pleasant to be around, whether that's a conference room, whether it's a lunch table, and you're going to figure out whether they can tell a good story about their past. And understand, communication skills, pleasant to be around, good storytelling skills, those all matter. I'm not saying that you shouldn't think about those. What I am saying is that there are different specific and measurable characteristics to look for when you're hiring salespeople. But before you can do that, I want you to realize this. The Journal of Occupational and Organizational Psychology discovered in a study about 5 years ago that most hiring decisions are made before the interview's halfway done. Now, does that mean that this stat is 15 minutes? I've heard it 5, I've heard it 20. I like this one because it's the most citable. I'm actually getting a lot more specific on my data, and I'll tell you about that before the end of this program. And I felt like this was probably the most accurate of all the stats out there. What they're saying is that at some point during the first 15 minutes, that hiring manager is making an emotional decision that says, okay, this person's for me. And then everything they do from that point on is designed to confirm that decision. Or, by the way, they're also making a decision this person isn't for me. And here's what happens. The interview trajectory changes. If they say, yep, this person's for me, they're going to throw out softball questions to try and validate that emotional decision they made that says, yeah, I like this person. On the other hand, if they make the decision, if they say, I don't think so, they're asking hardball questions that are designed to knock that person out. Here's the secret. Those are the questions that everybody should be asking. Especially on a first interview, your approach should be to ask questions designed to knock people out, and whoever survives, that's your candidate pool for that second behavioral interview that you should be doing. The biggest piece of advice I can give you in sales hiring is to remain emotionally detached. That doesn't mean you got to be a jerk. That doesn't mean you got to be rude. What it does mean is that you've got to be willing to sit back and not fall in like with someone. Make intellectual decisions rather than emotional decisions. Don't react to personal charisma. And that's hard because we have it beat into our skulls from the moment we get involved in sales that gift of gab and charisma are what it's all about, and that's not true. Intellectual is what it's all about. And I'll show you some characteristics momentarily. Hire intellectually, hire from your head, not from your heart, because what happens is the outcome of hiring from your gut, from charisma, from emotions, is that you hire the best interviewer, not the best salesperson. And those two, and I bet everybody on this webinar can probably think of some, those two are not necessarily the same people. So what do we look for? Here are 4 traits that, in my opinion, in my experience, and I've been doing this for a long time, I'm actually coming up on my 22nd anniversary in business. By far the longest I've ever held a job. I'm kidding. No, I'm actually not. I'm that, but my career was always short attention span theater. I love solving problems. I didn't love just riding on cruise control after they were solved, and that's why this career is absolutely ideal for me because there's always problems for people to solve. The 4 traits. First of all, intellectual curiosity. You find that out because of the questions that they ask. And the questions should be deeper than what's your vacation policy? And by the way, how often does commission get paid? I like questions about why do your customers buy from you? What should I look for? What's going to make me successful in this territory? What made the last salesperson successful? What's great about your product, your service, etc.? They should ask sales questions because an intellectually curious mind is a salesperson who will ask good questions of your customers. 80% of your chance to win or lose a sale is determined by the questions that you ask. So if you have a salesperson interviewing that's all talk, 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 and they don't ask any questions, guess what? That's what they're going to do on a sales call. And I will tell you, fact one, that turns off millennial and Gen Z buyers. And by the way, millennials and Gen Zs now compose 71% of people with buying authority in the B2B market. And that's only going to grow. So intellectual curiosity, I've always said it's the number one trait of a salesperson, but there are a few others. Coachability. Can they take feedback, apply it, and improve themselves? I look for salespeople who are always in the process of improvement. And I'll be very frank with you. I think one of the most disappointing things to me about sales over the last 10 to 15 years is it seems like salespeople have lost interest in proactively developing themselves. You may or may not know this about me, but my very first job in sales was selling new cars at Laird Noller Ford in Topeka, Kansas in 1990. And I thought that'd be the ideal job. I love cars. I'm a car guy. Working in the car business was going to be perfect. Well, it turns out I don't like the car business for reasons I probably don't have to explain on this webinar. But one of the things that strikes me as I think about that sales force, we read sales books. Now, some of them may not have been great sales books, although there's one book, Customers for Life by Carl Sewell, that's still on my bookshelf to this day that I bought in 1991 at the recommendation of another salesperson. But those of us that were selling new cars at Laird Noller Ford, we read sales books, we passed around sales books, we talked about the stuff that we read. Now, we may not have been the greatest salespeople ever, and we may have been working in a system that sucked, but damn it, we were trying to improve ourselves. And yet, when I ask salespeople nowadays, what's the last book you read, or what videos do you watch, or who do you follow, a lot of them don't have anything. Look for coachability and understand that asking those types of questions can give you a window into whether or not they're committed to ongoing development. Preparation. Do they walk in fat, dumb, and happy, or do they walk in ready to do business? One of my favorite questions to ask very early in the interview, before I get into asking about any of their jobs, is, what have you learned about my company between the time we set this interview and now? And if they say not much, that interview's over. I don't even have time for that crap anymore. It's too easy to learn about you and your company. I mean, if understand 30 years ago, if they said, not much, okay. There weren't as many resources. But now, for God's sake, you got everything from Google to ChatGPT to Claude to fully prepare you on an interview. And if they walk in fat, dumb, and happy to interview with you, they're going to walk in fat, dumb, and happy to a sales call with you. Look for preparation for that interview. That is, and that is a trait. Self-awareness. Okay, I'm gonna pick on the job hunting books in a moment here. Just a second. Once again, gotta grab a drink. Okay, I'm gonna pick on the job hunting books and the job hunting knowledge base out there because one of the things that they tell candidates is if you ask a candidate, what's your biggest weakness? The candidate is told to spin it into a string. Well, I think I'm just too committed. I just work too damn hard. You guys get the idea. I don't need to go through all the examples. They're laughable. Any candidate who is willing to say what their own weakness is a self-aware candidate who can and if they tell you what their weakness is, and they don't spin it into a strength, ask them how they're working on that. Ask them how they're improving themselves. And I'll tell you, and this was an interview question that I was asked on both of my last two sales management jobs. And they said, what's your biggest weakness? I said, my biggest weakness is that I can be an utter pain in the ass, but I get results. I said, I will guarantee you that I will ask for things that you cannot or will not provide. I will guarantee you that there will be times when you go home sprouting a few new gray hairs for having me as your sales manager, but also guarantee you that I'll get results. And it's true. That part of the reason I don't work for anybody other than myself nowadays. But and I also told people, I said it depends on how you look at a weakness, but I believe in work-life balance. And so don't expect me to be putting in 70 hours a week. It's not going to happen. And there were a few employers who chose not to hire me. That was a good decision on their part. But someone who is self-aware, who can actually articulate the things that you are likely to see as a problem, is somebody who can probably work on those things. People will show you or tell you how they're going to fail you. And there are some times, by the way, that if somebody's honest about a weakness, they're going to tell you how they're going to fail for you. So then what you have to do is listen and figure out if that is something they can change. Now, if they have self-awareness coupled with coachability, that's probably something that can be worked around. But I find that these four traits right here are probably top of the heap when it comes to predicting sales performance. So build an interview structure around these. Figure out questions to ask. And you know what? If you can't think of any questions to ask, this is where AI is a wonderful help. Go into Claude. My preferred platform, by the way, is Claude. I've actually done a webinar on this. But my preferred platform is Claude. But if you use ChatGPT or if you use Grok or whatever, that's okay. A lot of other platforms can get you where you need to go here too. The key, by the way, is to train your AI. Give it everything soup to nuts about what you do and what it is that you're trying to accomplish before you ask a question. And then I finish every one of anytime I start an AI prompt, when I start a new chat with Claude or anything, the last thing I say when I write that prompt is ask any clarifying questions you need before producing a result. And usually AI will come up with the right questions to ask. So if you're struggling with coming up with interview questions, AI is a great tool to help you, and then you can build on that. That you don't have to use exactly what comes out of AI. You can go back and forth, refine it, build on it, but use that as a tool. Okay, so you've got them hired. You've found people that have those four traits. You're home free, right? Uh-uh. Now you've got to develop them. Developing a salesperson is not a one-time project. Developing a salesperson is an ongoing project. It is something you do 100 times over a year. Now, I believe, and I've said this already, that the first 90 days are critical. They are telling about whether or not they're going to hit quota. According to the Bridge Group, and it was the same survey that I quoted in one of the other numbers, the average sales rep takes from 5 to 9 months to get to full productivity. Now, this is an area where the Bridge Group and I may have a little bit of a disagreement because when I delved into how they developed that ramp number, That ramp number was 5 to 9 months to get to a quota expectation. In other words, if you say you want somebody to do $100,000 a month, in 5 to 9 months, the average account executive was getting to $100,000 a month in 5 to 9 months. That's good. I really believe that salespeople really hit their stride in year 3 to year 4. At that point, they're beyond quota. This is the moment where maybe they become a superstar, but they really hit their stride. They really get in a groove. For most companies, it takes that long to really get your feet under you. And by the way, that means if you're evaluating a salesperson who's never held a job for 3 years, you know that salesperson doesn't even know what it really looks like to hit that stride. And that's something to think about as well. Again, most sales onboarding, you got 2 weeks, man. We're going to show you the product, shadow a few reps, run you through the office, interview, shake hands as quickly as possible because nobody's really got time to talk to you, tell you what they do. Here's your comp plan. There's your territory. There's your database. All right, let's go make it happen. And then that same sales leader can't figure out why maybe they never ramp or it takes a year. Your first 90 days should be broken out into those 3 phases. Those first 90 days should be broken out into phase 1, knowledge. And by the way, this is a huge discipline for you and it's a huge discipline for your salesperson because it's not fun, okay? That salesperson probably wants to go out and make sales calls too. Anything you don't teach them in the first 30 days is a mistake you're going to have to fix later, and it's going to cost you money. The cheapest thing that you can do overall is spend that first 30 days with a very structured, regimented, and oriented program for helping them learn your product, your company, your processes, your people, your competitive advantages, and everything else. 30 days gets them ready to do a competent sales call. Then in the second 30 days, have them ramp up to their normal run rate of weekly KPIs. For instance, let's say that you have a KPI that says, we want you to have 8 appointments per week. Well, in that second 30 days, the first week get 2, second week get 4, third week get 6, fourth week get 8. Now you're on your run rate. And then again, have some metric for accomplishment. If you have a short 30-day or less sales cycle, it's completely fair that they make a sale within that second 30 days. If they don't, have some sort of other metric. Maybe proposal size, whatever. But have checkpoints for each one of these that say you did it or you didn't do it. This prevents you from spending a year on somebody who's never going to make it. That doesn't mean you can't flex a little bit. If somebody has 6 or 7 appointments in that fourth week, that doesn't mean you got to fire them. Use your judgment a little bit. But always look at, are they still ramping? And at what point does that ramp hit my quota? And then figure out if that's still a good investment. So let's talk about a couple of styles of management here, babysitting and coaching. And I think that even the babysitting elements have some merit. That just shouldn't be the limit of what you do. Babysitting looks like checking their activity metrics every day. Okay, if you have to check activity metrics every day, there's probably a better use of your time. Review pipeline and every one-on-one. Not a full pipeline review, but at least have them hit a couple of hot prospects that they're going to get in the next week. Here's the big one, closing deals for the rep. If you are closing the deal for a rep, you are not doing your job. Your job as a sales leader, and I'm assuming there are sales leaders on this call, your job as a sales leader is to make them so good that they don't need you. My job, when I was a sales manager, I always felt like my job was to make my reps better than I was as a salesperson. And I was a good salesperson. I might have even been a great salesperson at certain moments, but I've had salespeople working for me who were better than I was. What I was great at was leading a sales team and solving sales organizational issues. Again, that's what I do now. But so many sales managers, that babysitting side is all they do. You should be investing at least, if you're a sales leader, you should be investing at least 2 to 3 days per week with your salespeople, sharing the field of battle, and not just reviewing calls, but participating in calls and building sales skills. In other words, don't go in and say, okay, I'm going to go close this call for you. Go in and say, okay, here's how to close a call. I want you to close this call this way. And if it goes sideways, we'll review afterwards. Sometimes as a coach, you have to let them fail. My job, how I interpreted my job as a sales manager, my North Star was every day when I walked in, I would think, I want to make one of my salespeople a little bit better today. Who's that going to be, and what am I going to do to make them better? And when I say make them better, I don't mean I'm going to help them get a deal over the finish line. I'm going to teach them a skill so they don't need me to help get deals over the finish line. For a sales leader, your yardstick is if I took a 2-week vacation and didn't call in and I left my sales team alone, how would they perform? If things wouldn't run fine, you're a babysitter. If things would run fine, you're a coach. Then part 3 is leading and retaining. Once we have those salespeople, once we've got them developed, we have to have them engaged. We have to keep them on board, and we need a succession plan. Now, I may surprise those of you who are on this call who are sales managers. Part of your job is to identify, train, and groom your successor. And some of you are thinking, what that means is that they can fire me. No. What that means is that they can promote you. Having a successor makes you promotable. Identifying and grooming a successor is one of the greatest services you can give to yourself, and it's one of the greatest services you can give to a company. When you lose a salesperson, again, average cost, $150,000 to $250,000. Now, what you'll see in the budget is, payroll, recruiting costs, advertising costs. What you don't see is lost pipeline or lost customers from a bad salesperson or lost customers from an empty territory. And every salesperson you turn erodes everybody else's desire to stay just a little bit more. You don't see it, but it's there. I like to keep sales turnover at or below 20% annually. That means if you have a 5-person sales team and you're turning more than 1 person a year, you need to take a good hard look at what you're doing. Look, nobody's going to stay anywhere forever, okay? We are going to have salespeople that leave due to circumstances out of our control. I get that. It's an imperfect world. Sometimes we have a salesperson who has topped out, not just for your company, but for your industry. But there's another industry up there that's beckoning them and saying, okay, you're ready for the big leagues. That's okay. That happens. When that happens, we shake their hand and we wish them well. And we look at them and say, I had something to do with that. However, what we're trying to minimize is unnecessary turnover. Now, I'm going to shock you here. A lot of times, the person you can't afford to lose is not your best rep, it's your third best rep. And I'm going to tell you why. Your third best rep is the backbone of your sales team. It's not your superstar. Okay, superstars can be fleeting. Your backbone of your sales rep is your third best rep for a number of reasons. First of all, they're the ones you can replicate. You can't replicate superstars when you're hiring, but you can replicate that third best guy, that person who is a quotarian, man or woman, who's a quotarian quarter after quarter, who knows their stuff. They know the account, they know the products, they know the customers. They are a good company citizen. Here's the thing about that person. Most of the time when your other reps need help, they're not calling the superstar. Because a lot of times that superstar is perceived as being too busy to descend down and help the middle reps. They're calling that third best rep because they know the third best rep's getting it done. And most of the time, the third best rep is the one who does step up and help. They're the ones who step up and say yes. when you need a favor from them. When you need a salesperson on board and you want to buddy them up with somebody, you're not going to put them with that top person because you don't want to take that top person's attention away. You go to that middle person, you say, "Hey, John, will you help me out? Kind of mentor this person as they're going through the onboarding." And you say, "Yeah, no problem. I'll do that." Here's what all that adds up to. They're your best candidate to replace you and become your next sales manager. Your next sales manager is that person who knows how to hit quota. They're the person who knows what they need to know to succeed. They know the company, they know the products. You cut them, they bleed your corporate colors, and they're willing to help other people. That is your bench strength for a sales manager. It's usually not the superstar because superstars tend to succeed at that level because they are so innately capable. They have such innate skills that, yeah, they're awesome, but they don't know why they're awesome. And they can't transfer those skills to the other people. That third best rep, they're the person who's having to think their way through the buyer's journey. They've got the mental checklist and they know where each customer is at any given time. And when you have to think your way through the sale, you can transfer that knowledge and use it to coach other people. These people really are the steady core of your sales department. Now, I'm not saying that you should piss off your best person and let them and fire them or let them go. I am saying build your approach around those middle people because those are the steady core of your sales organization. And when they leave, a lot of times you use a pipeline. Team performance gets harmed because you've got to have other people patch into their territory and you lose your succession plan. That is why the person you can't afford to lose oftentimes isn't the person you think it is. And this is just like they have a thinking person's approach to sales. This is your thinking person's approach to sales management. Build your processes, your onboarding and all that around creating and replicating more of those people. This is why, by the way, a lot of companies go the direction of very little onboarding because they look at their top person. They say, Jerry didn't need that. I'm not going to, I want more Jerrys. So I'm not going to give that resource. And what they end up with is a revolving door. And it costs them a lot of money. I bet your third best rep probably needed more of that type of shepherding than your superstars. Again, work to retain your third best rep, work to replicate your third best rep. And that leads us to managing versus leading. Managing, you manage things, you lead people. And that's a saying I've heard for many years, and it still holds true. Managing. Well, you're managing the process, the numbers, this quarter's results. It's a very short-term, number-by-number, office-bound strategy. You cannot manage a sales organization by spending all week in the office. You can only lead, well, okay, you can manage. You can't lead a sales organization by staying in the office all week. You lead a sales organization by getting out of your office, sharing the field of battle, developing the people, looking for obstacles to the numbers being hit rather than just banging on people. Say, hit your numbers. You look for reasons why. I just did a survey with a trade organization. I'm not going to say who. I'm actually doing, I promised I was going to talk about this. I'm actually doing a very large scale research project into B2B buying habits, how they affect selling, and how the changes in those buying habits have been driven by generational and technological changes. And the data I'm getting back is very, very revealing. This is a project I'm going to be doing for the rest of this year. I'm working with a number of different trade associations to survey their members to get seller side data. I'm working with a number of my big clients and other companies that I'm aware of to do buyer side surveys to get buyer side data. And then I'm actually doing some research projects and some calling tests with other companies to get data on dials, connects, and appointment ratios. And I'm going to bake all of this together into the most comprehensive survey of where the B2B buying environment stands in 2026 I'll be honest, I don't see anything out there that's been attempted. There are people who've done fragments of it, but nobody's tied it all together. And my target is to release that report on January 12th of 2027. And I'll be announcing it through my newsletter and everything. I'm actually going to survey the people in my newsletter. So if you're watching this, you'll be getting my newsletter, and therefore you will be getting emails about being a part of that survey. And I hope you do. With all of that said, one of the things that I have discovered is that in that particular industry that I did the survey in, the strategy isn't removing obstacles to make the numbers possible or revalidating whether the numbers work in 2026. The strategy is pounding on people and going right to accountability and activity. And I think I'm going to see that a lot across the board. And that's one of the things that has to change on the seller side for sales to continue to advance itself as a profession. Finally, the final aspect of leading, and this is something that I did looking down the road, 2 years, 3 years. Who's my team going to be? What are they going to look like? And who's going to lead them if I'm not here anymore? Building for the future. If you are just pounding the numbers and focused on quarter to quarter results, you're leaving a lot on the table, because the best sales leaders look down the road and they figure out what the future looks like, and then they figure out how to facilitate and build the future that they want. But that determines who stays and who leaves. The people who manage, who bang on the numbers, enforce processes, work quarter to quarter, and hey, John, great quarter last quarter, you're awesome. And then this quarter, John, your numbers were down, you suck. John's going to leave. And John is right in leaving. Leaders understand that sales is a marathon and not a sprint. Okay. And so tailor your style around leading. So where have we been? Well, we've been through the Navigator's chart webinar, the overview of it. We've done the waters, we've done the vessel, we've done the crew. The next webinar, which will be in September, and I will be releasing that to my newsletter within the next week or two. That'll be in September, and that will be on the route, which will be your sales methodology.